We're all hoping that we'll get finally some good news from the conflict in Gaza tonight. The first 13 of 50 hostages held by Hamas inside Gaza, they're due to be released shortly. I think later tonight, maybe around midnight, a bit later than that. It's part of a 4-day ceasefire deal, which was finally reached after 6 weeks of very torrid fighting. But look, it's not all good news, as it was never going to be. We had a blast just across the border there just before the ceasefire kicked in at 4 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time today. But in exchange for Hamas releasing 50 innocent Israeli hostages, and some of them women, children, who were snatched from just over the border, Israel has agreed to release 150 Palestinian prisoners that are being held in its jails. Most of them are teenage boys. Joining me now to discuss this, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute senior analyst Malcolm Davis. Malcolm, nice to catch up with you again. 50 Israeli hostages for 150 Palestinians. You'd have to argue probably hardened criminals. Does that say to you that Israel's willing to do just about anything to get those hostages back?
I think probably any country would be willing to get its people back from being held hostage. I think that, if you look past examples, I think the Israelis exchanged about 2,000 prisoners for a single Israeli soldier held by Hezbollah. So I think there's a precedent set here. And I think that what you will see, hopefully, is Hamas living up to their end of the deal and releasing those 50 Israeli hostages. And in return, the Israelis will release those 150 criminals. As you say, most of them are teenage boys. There's none that are being released that have committed acts of violence against Israel.
Malcolm, we all had our eye on Sky just before 4 o'clock. At about 10 minutes to 4, there was the live vision of that massive explosion. It seemed to be on the Gaza side, a huge amount of smoke. That's just before the ceasefire commenced. I mean, you can read whatever you like into it. I mean, you know much better than me. Is that Israel sending a message that, OK, we're going to stop in 10 minutes, but you've got to realise that once we get this hostage deal done, we're still coming for you if you are Hamas inside Gaza?
I think the Israelis have made that clear already, that they're not going to give up whilst Hamas is basically intact. If the Israelis did that, then Hamas would simply regroup, rearm and launch another October 7th style attack. And we'd be back where we started. So I think that the Israelis are sending a clear message to Hamas that this is a temporary thing, to exchange hostages, to bring in some aid into Gaza, and then the war will begin again. And I think the Israelis are correct in the sense that they cannot allow an organisation, a terrorist group like Hamas, to remain intact. They have to decisively defeat them. They have to destroy their leadership and their command and control such that Hamas can never regroup and once again threaten Israel.
So Israel is known to have some of the best intelligence in the world. They would have operatives inside Gaza, presumably, feeding back to them information on where the remaining Hamas terrorists are located. Do we think that we've got the majority of the innocent people out of that part of the north, and most of them are now in the south? Because it would appear once the hostages are released that Israel's going to go back in just as hard, Malcolm.
I think it's impossible to know just how many civilians are in the north at this point in time. There would be Palestinian civilians that are not part of Hamas that are caught in the crossfire. I think the Israelis will do everything they possibly can to avoid inflicting needless civilian deaths. And you've got this 4-day ceasefire, which potentially could be extended for a day for every 10 additional hostages that are released by Hamas. The Israelis will make good use of that in terms of gathering intelligence on what Hamas are doing. Hamas will be trying to regroup and rearm their own forces, and so the Israelis will be watching that very carefully and gathering intelligence so that when the war does begin again, they can be more effective and more decisive and precise in their attacks on Hamas.
I opened the program, Malcolm, talking about that boat arrival. 12 people, unidentified at the moment, turned up on the mainland, way up in the Kimberley, really very remote area. If it turns out that these 12 who are now on their way to Nauru are actually customers of people smugglers, how worried should we be that the people smuggling operation has considered that there's now a crack in our defence?
Look, one boat, I think, does not necessarily make a flood of illegal immigrants. I think we have to put this into perspective. Having said that, if the government does not do something to quickly strengthen our border protection, and if that is seen by people smugglers up in places like Indonesia and so forth, then we could see more people smuggling attempts coming towards our shores. And at that point, it does become more politically damaging for the government. So I think really it's down to Prime Minister Albanese and Defence Minister Richard Marles and the Foreign Minister Penny Wong to actually work quickly to ensure that the message is sent that we will not tolerate people smuggling. We will not tolerate a wave of boats coming to our northern coast. And it does now be the case that the ball is in their court.
Malcolm Davis, great to catch up. Thank you very much for that. Malcolm Davis looking after us on what's unfolding tonight in the Middle East.